I'm Clara Hayes, 34 years old, defense attorney. And on that day, the day everything I thought I knew about love shattered, I was standing in courtroom 7B, seconds away from losing the case. And my entire life, the air inside the courtroom felt like glass, sharp, fragile, ready to break at any second. My client, a small business owner accused of embezzlement, sat trembling beside me. Across the aisle, the prosecutor adjusted his tie, wearing that smug half-smile that made my stomach twist. Then came the sound. "Call the next witness." The bailiff's voice echoed through the room. Heavy and final, everyone turned as the doors opened. A tall figure entered, the so-called anonymous witness. He wore a gray suit and a ridiculous blonde wig that made him look like a bad actor in a disguise. I'd already objected to the anonymity, but the judge allowed it on security grounds. I remember thinking, whoever he is, he's the prosecution's secret weapon. The witness raised his right hand and took the oath. I studied every detail. His movements, the way his hand trembled slightly, how his shoulders stiffened when the prosecutor approached. Something about his stance felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Not yet," the prosecutor began. "Please tell the court what you saw." The witness cleared his throat. His voice came out low, hesitant. I was part of the accounting department. I noticed discrepancies, transfers routed through offshore accounts. It wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate. I felt a prickle run down my spine. That voice, it wasn't the pitch or tone, it was the pause between words. The subtle way he swallowed before key sentences. My heartbeat quickened. The judge looked toward me. "Counselor, your cross-examination?" I stood. My palms were clammy, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Your Honor, before I begin, I must request that the witness remove his disguise. For procedural transparency." The room went still. The prosecutor stiffened. "Your Honor, that's unnecessary. His identity is crucial to the defense," I cut in, sharper than I intended. "If this witness is testifying to internal company matters, I have a right to know who he is," the judge sighed. Objection overruled. "Witness, remove the wig." The man froze. The silence that followed was suffocating. Everyone's eyes locked on him. He reached up, fingers brushing the edge of the blonde wig. Hesitating, then slowly, he peeled it off, and my world cracked open. Dark brown hair, the faint scar above the left eyebrow, the exact same eyes that had looked into mine that very morning as he kissed me goodbye and said, "Wish me luck today." It was Ethan, my husband. The breath punched out of me. I heard gasps ripple through the courtroom, a dozen whispers overlapping like static. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order! Order in the court!" But all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. Ethan didn't look at me at first. His eyes fixed on the judge, jaw tight, lips pressed together. Like a stranger. "Mr. Hayes," the prosecutor said, barely suppressing a smirk, "please continue your testimony." I blinked hard, my vision blurring. Mr. Hayes. They were using his name. Everyone knew now. He finally looked at me, just for a second. His expression was cold, calculated, and it broke me more than if he'd shouted. He began to speak again, each word slicing through the air. "I discovered files labeled as private, hidden directories containing transaction data that matched the defendant's name. These records were encrypted, but I recognized the patterns." Objection!" I shouted. "This witness has personal ties to me. This entire testimony is compromised." The judge raised a hand. "You'll have your chance, counselor. Sit down." My knees nearly gave out. I sank back into my chair, my throat dry. Ethan continued. "The evidence shows that funds were moved to accounts linked to shell corporations." I warned Clara. My head snapped up. "You what?" He looked at me, eyes empty. "I told you about it months ago. You said it wasn't our concern." The room spun. That was a lie. A twisted half-truth designed to sound damning. The prosecutor stepped closer. "So, Mr. Hayes, you're saying your wife, the defense attorney, knew about these discrepancies and chose to ignore them?" Objection. My voice cracked. "He's misrepresenting." "Overruled," the judge said firmly. My fingers trembled as I gripped the edge of the defense table. I could feel the eyes, every reporter, every juror burning holes through me. Ethan wouldn't meet my gaze anymore. He just kept talking calmly, clinically, exposing confidential files, private messages, things only someone with access to my personal laptop could know. I remembered him coming into my study late at night, saying he just wanted to help me organize case files. I remembered the flash drive he borrowed and never returned. Oh my God, he'd been preparing this, the man who slept beside me. The man who whispered, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." He was the one destroying me. When his testimony ended, the prosecutor looked triumphant. The judge announced a recess. I could barely stand. As everyone filed out, I just sat there, staring at the empty witness stand. My client whispered, "Clara, are you okay?" I couldn't answer. My voice was gone. In my mind, I replayed that moment. His hand lifting the wig, the look in his eyes. Not guilt, not hesitation, just resolve. And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. My husband had just become my enemy, but that was only the beginning. If you've ever felt your world crumble in a single heartbeat, you know the strange silence that follows. That silence filled my head as I sat frozen in the courtroom. But my mind drifted back, 2 weeks earlier, before I knew my husband's voice could turn into a weapon. Back then, my life was steady, predictable, maybe even happy. Every morning began the same way. The smell of freshly brewed coffee, the faint hum of the espresso machine I'd insisted on buying with my first big case win, and Ethan, humming off-key in the kitchen while flipping pancakes, wearing that stupid apron that said, "Kiss the cook." "Clara," he called from the stove. "You want blueberries or chocolate chips today?" I was hunched over my laptop at the counter, scrolling through witness statements. "Surprise me," he grinned. "You always say that, and then complain when I choose blueberries." I looked up, smiled despite myself. "I complain because you put half the carton in one pancake." "That's called generosity," he said, sliding the plate toward me. "You should try it sometime, Counselor Hayes," I laughed. "I'm plenty generous. Ask my clients. Oh, I do. They all say you terrify them into honesty." We laughed again, and I remember thinking how easy it felt. The rhythm of us, banter, laughter, comfort. After 7 years together, we'd found our rhythm. Ethan worked in tech, cybersecurity to be precise. He was brilliant, calm, methodical, the kind of man who remembered to water the plants and back up our photos to the cloud. I used to joke that if our house ever caught fire, he'd save the hard drive before saving himself. He'd laugh, hold me, and say, "That's because everything I love is on that drive, including you." Cheesy, right? But I fell for it every time. That morning, as he poured me coffee, I said, "Big case today. Preliminary hearing." He leaned against the counter. "The widow case?" "Yeah, Margaret Cole. Everyone's convinced she siphoned her late husband's accounts, but I don't buy it." He frowned slightly. "Didn't the husband leave her everything?" "Not everything," I said, sipping my coffee. "There's an inheritance trust involved. Complicated paperwork, but I believe her. She loved him. You can hear it in her voice when she talks about him." Ethan's smile flickered. Just a fraction of a second. I noticed, barely, and brushed it off. Maybe he was just tired. Then he said, "Just be careful, okay? People aren't always what they seem." I raised an eyebrow. "You're telling a defense lawyer that?" He chuckled, kissed my forehead, and murmured, "Still? Promise me." I promised. If I had known that promise would become a curse, I would have run that night. But I didn't. I went to work. My office downtown overlooked the courthouse. I liked being able to see where justice happened, even when it broke my heart. My assistant, Nia, was already waiting when I arrived. "Morning, boss," she said, juggling a stack of folders. "The Cole file's on your desk. Also, the press wants a quote about the case." "Tell them the same thing as yesterday," I said, setting down my bag. "My client is innocent until proven otherwise," Nia smirked. "You and your noble sound bites. Someone's got to say them." As I went through the files, I thought about how much this case meant to me. Not just for my career, though it was high profile and every network wanted to cover it, but because I believed in it. Margaret Cole reminded me of my mother, strong, misunderstood, loyal. When I first met Margaret, she sat across from me, wringing her hands. "They think I killed him," she whispered. "That I used him." I told her, "People only see what the headlines show. It's my job to show them the truth." She'd looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You really believe in people, don't you?" I smiled. "I try to. That was my biggest strength and my greatest flaw. I believed in people, especially Ethan." That night I came home late. The house was dimly lit. Only the kitchen light was on. Ethan was sitting at the table, laptop open, glasses perched on his nose. I leaned on the doorway. "Working again?" He looked up and smiled. "Just a few client reports." "How was court?" "Long," I sighed, kicking off my heels. "But good. I think we're making progress." "Progress is good." I poured myself a glass of water and sat across from him. His laptop screen was half turned away from me, something he'd never done before. "What's that?" I asked casually. He hesitated, then said, "Just a consulting gig." "Security audit. For who?" "A small firm. Nothing major." I nodded, not thinking twice. He was always consulting, always buried in codes and reports that looked like gibberish to me. I yawned. "You staying up late?" "Probably," he said. "You go ahead. I'll join you soon." But he didn't. When I woke at 3 a.m., the bed was cold on his side. The soft glow from the office still spilled under the door. I remember lying there, half awake, listening to the faint clack of his keyboard. Tap, pause, tap, faster. It was a sound I'd grown used to. Comforting, even. Now, when I remember it, it sounds like the ticking of a countdown. The following weekend, we had dinner with friends, a small group from college. Wine, laughter, nostalgia. Halfway through the night, my phone buzzed with an email. From an unknown sender. Subject line: Coal estate, internal files. I frowned, glancing at it. "Ethan noticed. Work?" he asked lightly. "Yeah, probably just a late update." He reached across, covered my hand. "Hey, you promised weekends are for us." I smiled. "You're right." I locked my phone and slid it away. He laughed. "That's my girl." Everyone else went back to their conversation. But for a moment, his eyes stayed on me, not soft, not warm, watchful, almost like he was measuring my reaction. I shrugged it off again. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You explain away the unease. Monday came, and with it, chaos. My client's financial records had new entries, ones I didn't recognize. When I called Margaret, she was confused too. "I never authorized that," she said, panicked. "I don't even know what those accounts are." I promised I'd look into it. I told her I'd find out who planted them. That night, I mentioned it to Ethan over dinner. "Strange," I said, stabbing at my salad. "Someone's been altering digital records in the coal case. Fake entries, new transactions. I'm hiring a forensic analyst tomorrow." Ethan froze mid-bite. Then he forced a laugh. "You think someone's hacking your client's accounts?" "Could be. I mean, it looks clean. Too clean. Whoever did it knew what they were doing." He nodded slowly. "Well, you know how people can manipulate metadata. It's almost impossible to trace." I looked up. "You sound like you've done it before." He grinned. "Hey, I'm in cybersecurity, remember? I know how it's done, so I know how to protect you from it." It was meant to sound reassuring, but the way he said, "protect you," made my stomach twist. Still, I smiled. Guess I'm lucky to be married to my own bodyguard. He leaned across the table, kissed me softly. "Always," he murmured, and for a moment I believed him. The night before the first hearing, I was up late rehearsing my opening argument. Ethan brought me tea, kissed the top of my head, and said, "You were born for this, Clara." I smiled. "You really think so?" "I know so." He walked behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders. His thumbs pressed gently into my skin, a reassuring rhythm. "You've got this," he whispered. "No one can touch you in that courtroom." And that was true, until he did. The next morning, when he kissed me goodbye, I didn't know he'd be walking into the same courthouse, not as my husband, but as my betrayer. If I had known that smile hid a secret alliance, I would have run that night, but I didn't. I went to court. I walked straight into the trap. After that first hearing, I told myself everything would calm down. That Ethan's strange distance was just stress. That the pressure of my case had seeped into our home life, but it didn't calm down. It got worse, in tiny, almost invisible ways. It started with the drawer. One night, I came home late again, files scattered across my desk, a storm of coffee cups and highlighters. I walked into my home office, half asleep, and froze. The drawer where I kept my confidential case notes was slightly open. I never left it open. Never. I stared at it for a long moment, my hand hovering over the edge. My papers inside looked shuffled, a few pages out of place. Notes stacked unevenly. My stomach tightened. "Ethan?" I called out. "Yeah?" His voice came from the kitchen. "Did you come in here?" He walked in a few seconds later, drying his hands on a towel. "In here? No, why?" I gestured to the drawer. "It's open. I always lock it." He glanced at it, shrugged. "Maybe you forgot?" "I don't forget that." He gave a small laugh. "Clara, you've barely slept in a week. You could have left it open." Something about the way he said it, calm, reasonable, made me feel crazy for even asking. "Yeah," I muttered finally. "Maybe," he kissed my temple. "You overthink everything. Come to bed." I followed him, trying to believe that's all it was, me overthinking. But the next morning, one of my USB drives was missing. When I asked him if he'd seen it, he didn't even look up from his phone. "You probably left it at work." I searched my bag twice. It wasn't there. And yet somehow when I came home that night, it was back on my desk. A few days later, he told me he was going on a business trip. "Just 2 nights," he said, tossing clothes into his suitcase. "Company's sending me to Chicago. Routine audit." I leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "You never mentioned that." It came up last minute. "You hate traveling." He zipped the bag shut. "Sometimes I don't get to choose." I smiled faintly. "Welcome to my world." He chuckled, kissed me, and said, "Don't burn yourself out while I'm gone." When the door closed behind him, the silence that filled the house was too clean. Too empty. The first night he was gone, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the echo of his words: case, audit, routine. At 1 a.m., I went into the kitchen for water. The window above the sink reflected my own face, tired, hollow-eyed, unsure. Then I heard it, a faint vibration, his phone. He'd left it charging on the counter. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But curiosity, fear, whatever it was, it won. A message flashed across the screen. "Secure files sent. Expect confirmation by morning." My heart thudded. Then the phone went dark again. When I unlocked it, the message was gone, deleted. My throat went dry. Secure files. I stared at the blank screen, waiting for my brain to catch up. Maybe it wasn't about my case. Maybe it was work. He dealt with files all the time, right? Still? Why delete it instantly? The next morning, the opposing counsel, Mason Wright, was all confidence and smug charm. He smirked across the table during pretrial negotiations, his pen tapping lazily. "Rough night, Counselor Hayes?" he asked. "Why?" I replied, matching his tone. He leaned back, grin widening. "Just seems like you're missing some pieces of the puzzle." "What pieces?" "Oh, I don't know," he said, flipping through his folder. "Like the updated trust amendment your client conveniently forgot to mention." My pulse quickened. "That document isn't public." "How did you—" he shrugged. "Lucky guess." Nia, my assistant, shot me a worried look from behind him. When we left the room, she whispered, "He had things he shouldn't have, Clara. Internal drafts." "Someone's feeding him." I stopped mid-hallway. "That's impossible. Unless someone has access to your system." I shook my head. "No, Ethan keeps my security tighter than the Pentagon's." Nia hesitated. "Yeah, but what if it's not the system? What are you implying?" She looked away. "Nothing. Forget it." But I couldn't forget it. That night, I got home early. The house was still, except for the faint hum of the fridge. I went straight to the office, pulled open my drawers, checked every file, all there. Maybe I was just paranoid. Then I saw it. A faint, dusty footprint on the carpet near my desk. Size 11, Ethan's size. My chest tightened. I sat on the floor, head in my hands. "You're losing it, Clara." But I wasn't, because that's when I found it. 2 days later, Ethan called. "Hey, I'm back early," he said cheerfully. "Flight landed ahead of schedule. Can you pick me up?" "Sure." On the way, I stopped for gas. While filling up, I reached for the windshield cleaner in the trunk. And something caught my eye. A leather folder. My folder, the one with Margaret Cole's financial records. I froze. My name was embossed on the corner. Inside were copies of confidential client files, annotated, marked, and missing my signature page. I felt dizzy. How the hell did this end up in his car? I flipped through it, my hands shaking. Some pages had sticky notes in his handwriting, little technical notes about metadata, encryption traces. He'd analyzed my case files, and then I saw it. A name scrawled at the top of one page. Mason W. My breath caught. Mason Wright. No, it couldn't be. This had to be a mix-up. Ethan was helping. Maybe he was cross-referencing something for me. Maybe. My thoughts shattered when I heard the car door click behind me. Looking for something? His voice was calm, almost playful. I turned slowly. Ethan stood there, a travel bag slung over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," I said softly, clutching the folder to my chest. "What is this doing in your car?" He looked at me, then at the folder, and smiled. But it wasn't the smile I knew. It didn't reach his eyes. "Funny," he said, taking a step closer. "I was about to ask you the same thing." The way he said it, smooth, controlled, made my skin crawl. "Ethan, these are my client's documents. You shouldn't even have them." "Relax, Clara." His tone was almost mocking now. "You probably left them in here. You've been so distracted lately. I never bring case files into your car." He tilted his head, smirking. "Then how do you explain that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. He stepped forward, gently took the folder from my hands, and placed it back in the trunk, closing it with a firm click. "Let's not make this into something it's not," he said softly. "You trust me, right?" My voice came out a whisper. "Of course." "Good." He smiled again, cold, precise. "Then stop looking at me like you're afraid." He turned and walked toward the house, whistling under his breath. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed trunk, my reflection faintly visible in the glossy black paint. For the first time, I didn't recognize the woman staring back, and for the first time, I realized the man I loved was keeping secrets from me, dangerous ones. I wish I could tell you that what happened next was a nightmare, that I woke up sweating, shaking, and realized it was all a dream, but it wasn't. It was real. 2 weeks after I found that folder in Ethan's car, I was back in that same courthouse, dressed in the same black suit I'd worn for countless victories. Except that morning, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The courtroom was already buzzing when I walked in. Reporters whispered. Cameras clicked softly behind the glass. Margaret, my client, sat beside me, eyes swollen from crying. "They said there's a new witness," she whispered. "Someone who knows everything." I forced a smile. "Don't worry. We'll handle it." But deep down, something cold was spreading through my chest, a quiet dread I couldn't shake. Then the bailiff spoke. "Call the next witness." The doors opened, and he walked in. Ethan, my husband, my betrayer. The world went still. He wore the same gray suit I'd seen in our closet that morning, the one he'd worn to our anniversary dinner last year. His tie perfectly knotted, his expression unreadable. He wouldn't even look at me. The prosecutor, Mason Wright, the man who'd smirked at me for weeks, stood tall beside him, brimming with satisfaction. "Your Honor," Mason said smoothly, "our witness will shed light on the financial discrepancies at the heart of this case." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Ethan raised his right hand, took the oath, and sat down in the witness stand. For a second, his eyes flicked toward me. No warmth, no recognition, just Ice Mason began. "Mr. Hayes, can you please tell the court your professional background?" "I work in cybersecurity," Ethan said calmly. His voice was steady, confident, the same tone he'd used when reassuring me at home. "I've specialized in financial data reconstruction for over 10 years. And in that role," Mason continued, "did you have access to any evidence relevant to this case?" Ethan paused, just long enough for the cameras to zoom in on his face. Then he said, "Yes, I reviewed digital files obtained from a personal device belonging to the defense attorney, Clara Hayes." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. My breath caught in my throat. My name. My device. What did you just say? I stammered, rising halfway to my feet. Mason turned, feigning politeness. Please, counselor, you'll have your chance to respond. The judge's gavel struck sharply. Order in the court. I sat down slowly, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Mason continued. Mr. Hayes, what did you discover? Ethan clasped his hands together, his posture straight. I found a series of unauthorized fund transfers originating from Ms. Hayes's client trust account. The amounts matched withdrawals made from Mrs. Cole's estate. My chest tightened. That's a lie, I whispered under my breath. He went on. The digital signature and encryption keys matched Clara's credentials. Every transaction traced back to her. Mason turned toward the jury with mock concern. So you're saying, Mr. Hayes, that your own wife, he paused for effect, diverted her client's funds into a private account? Ethan didn't blink. Yes, she knew what she was doing, Your Honor. My vision blurred. That voice, that calm, confident voice, was the same one that once said, I love you. The same tone he used when he promised, You can trust me. I wanted to scream. To stand up and shout, You're lying. But all that came out was a broken whisper. Why are you doing this to me? The judge turned. Counselor Hayes, control yourself. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I murmured, forcing air into my lungs. Ethan didn't even flinch. Mason slid a folder across the table. For the record, we're submitting Exhibits D through H, screenshots of transaction logs recovered from the defense's personal laptop. These include dates, signatures, and encryption hashes consistent with those found on the plaintiff's server. I glanced down, and my stomach twisted. Those were my files. My laptop, my digital notes, the very ones I'd seen him working on late at night. He'd taken them. Twisted them. Used them to frame me. Objection. I managed to choke out. This evidence was obtained illegally. Mason smiled thinly. The witness accessed them during a period of shared domestic access. That's not illegal, counselor. That's marriage. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge raised her gavel. Enough. The objection is overruled. Continue. Ethan's eyes finally met mine, and for a moment, something flickered there. Guilt? Pity? No, it was victory. He spoke again, each word a dagger. She always said she wanted to win at any cost. I didn't realize that meant crossing ethical lines. Stop it, I whispered, barely audible. Please, he ignored me. She told me she could make evidence disappear, that she had friends who could bury digital trails. I believed her. I shouldn't have. The room spun. Every word from his mouth was rewriting my life, turning years of love into ammunition. When the prosecutor finished, the judge glanced at me. Cross-examination? My mouth opened, but no sound came. How could I question him? The man who knew every detail of my life. Every password, every weakness. I tried to steady myself. Mr. Hayes, I said, my voice shaking, did you have permission to access my client files? He leaned forward slightly. I didn't need permission. You left your system unlocked. I was trying to help. Help? My voice cracked. You fabricated evidence. The judge snapped. Counselor! But I couldn't stop. You're lying, Ethan. You're twisting everything. He stayed calm. Perfectly calm. While I fell apart. Maybe, he said quietly, you just can't accept what you've done. I felt my knees weaken. Mason closed his folder with theatrical precision. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge called for a recess. I sat there, staring at nothing, my fingers numb against the polished table. Margaret touched my arm gently. Clara, is any of that true? Tears blurred my vision. No, none of it. He's setting me up. She swallowed hard. Why would he do that? I had no answer. When court adjourned for the day, the crowd poured out, murmuring, pointing, whispering my name. I stood slowly, gathering my papers with trembling hands. Ethan stepped down from the witness stand and walked right past me. I thought maybe he'd glance at me. Maybe there'd be a flicker of the man I knew, but there was nothing. No glance. No hesitation. No remorse, just silence. As he passed, Mason leaned toward him and said something I couldn't hear. Ethan nodded once, his jaw tight. I froze in the aisle, clutching my briefcase like it was the only thing holding me up. The reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Questions flew at me like stones. Mrs. Hayes, are you facing disbarment? Did your husband expose your crimes? Were you aware he'd testify? I couldn't speak. I pushed through the doors into the bright courthouse lobby, my heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. Outside, the sunlight burned. It should have felt warm, but it didn't. It felt cruel. I stood there, staring at the fountain in the courtyard, the sound of rushing water drowning out the noise around me. Inside that building, my career had just died. Inside that building, my husband had killed it, and my heart along with it. The man who once vowed to protect me had just destroyed everything I built, and I had no idea why. That night, silence had a weight. It pressed against the walls, seeped into the furniture, sat heavy on my chest. I drove home from the courthouse on autopilot. Streetlights blurred into streaks of gold through the windshield. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight they ached, but I didn't loosen them, because if I did, I might have shattered. When I stepped inside, the house looked exactly the same, our wedding photos still on the hallway table, the scent of his cologne faint in the air, but everything felt wrong. He was in the kitchen when I found him, calm, pouring himself a glass of whiskey like nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching his back, my pulse pounding in my ears. Finally, I whispered, "Why?" He didn't turn around. "Why what?" "You know what I'm talking about." My voice cracked, trembling between anger and heartbreak. "Why did you do that to me?" He swirled the amber liquid in his glass before taking a slow sip. I had to tell the truth. I let out a hollow laugh. The truth? My throat burned. You stood there and lied under oath. He faced me then, calm, collected, eyes cold. Maybe you're the one who's lying, Clara. Maybe you've just convinced yourself you're innocent, the way he said it. Soft, deliberate, almost rehearsed. I took a step closer. You're not even trying to deny it, are you? That you planned this? He tilted his head slightly. You're tired, emotional. You'll say things you'll regret. Don't you dare gaslight me, I snapped, tears stinging my eyes. You ruined my career, Ethan. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Why? He looked away, his jaw tightening. I did what was necessary. I waited for more. An explanation. A hint of regret. Anything. But all he did was take another sip of his drink and walk past me. His shoulder brushed mine, cold and deliberate. Get some rest, he said quietly. You'll need it for tomorrow. And then he went upstairs. Just like that. No guilt. No emotion. Just gone. I stood there, shaking, staring at the empty staircase. My body felt hollow, like all the air had been sucked out of me. That line echoed in my head. I had to tell the truth, except it wasn't truth. It was strategy. Something about his tone, measured, mechanical, gnawed at me. He wasn't improvising. He was following a plan. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and walked toward his office. The room was dark, except for the faint blue light of his laptop still glowing on the desk. He never left it unlocked. But tonight... He had. My hands hesitated over the keyboard. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me still clung to the hope that this was all a misunderstanding, that maybe Mason had manipulated him somehow. But curiosity, or maybe survival, won. I clicked. Open his email. The inbox looked ordinary at first. Work reports, invoices, client messages. But then I saw a folder buried at the bottom. Personal, archive. When I opened it, my breath caught. There were dozens of threads between Ethan and Mason Wright, the opposing counsel. Subject lines, case strategy, timeline coordination, testimony drafts. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through them. They'd been emailing for weeks. Plotting every step. Mason. Once she submits her evidence list, I'll feed it to the judge through pretrial leaks. The goal is to make her look reckless. Ethan. I can handle that. I still have access to her laptop. I'll extract what you need. Mason. Perfect. Once she's disbarred, the settlement is ours. My heart stopped. Once she's disbarred, The settlement is ours. The room tilted. I pressed a hand against the desk to steady myself. They weren't just trying to ruin me. They were profiting from it. I scrolled faster. Screenshots of my files, drafts of his testimony, payment receipts. He'd been paid to betray me. Every message was a knife to the chest. Ethan. She still trusts me. She won't see it coming. That line, that one, broke something in me. I slammed the laptop shut and stumbled back, my pulse roaring in my ears. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen, pale, hollow-eyed, shaking. I wanted to scream, to throw something. But all I did was whisper, "How could you?" For years, I'd built my life around loyalty, believing that honesty was sacred, that love and truth were the same thing. And now the man who once promised me forever had sold me out for money. The tears came hot and fast, silent at first, then uncontrollable. I sank onto the floor, knees against my chest, sobbing until my throat hurt. Every memory of us, our wedding vows, our late-night talks, our quiet Sunday mornings, now felt like a lie written in someone else's handwriting. But beneath the heartbreak, something darker began to stir. Anger. No, not just anger. Fury. Cold. Focused. Dangerous fury. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and opened the laptop again. If they wanted to play dirty, fine. I'd play smarter. I plugged in a flash drive, one I kept hidden in my briefcase for backup case files. I copied every email, every attachment, every single piece of evidence. The progress bar crept across the screen like a heartbeat. When it finished, I safely ejected the drive, slipped it into my blazer pocket, and closed the laptop. I stood up slowly, feeling something new, something powerful building in my chest. They'd broken me. They thought I'd crawl away in shame, but they underestimated the woman they tried to destroy. I looked toward the staircase. The bedroom light was still on. I could hear his faint footsteps overhead, calm, steady, like nothing was wrong. I almost laughed, let him sleep. Let him think he'd won, because tomorrow I'd make sure the truth tore him apart. I glanced once more at the reflection in the dark window. The same eyes that had once looked soft and trusting now glimmered with something else. Entirely. Determination. I whispered to myself, "You didn't just betray me. You declared war." The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet. The air smelled like coffee and rain. I moved through the motions, shower, suit, makeup, but everything felt mechanical. My face looked calm, but inside I was fire. As I drove to the courthouse, the flash drive sat in my palm like a weapon. Every mile I drove, every breath I took, I repeated one thought. You took everything from me. Now I'll take everything back. When I stepped out of the car, the world was gray and heavy with clouds. Cameras still waited near the entrance, but I didn't care anymore. Let them record. Let the whole world watch, because today I was done being the victim. I moved like a ghost through my own life, visible but careful not to touch anything that might set off an alarm. First, I stopped with the dramatic gestures. No dramatic confrontations, no public accusations. If Mason and Ethan wanted to play chess, I'd learn their rules and then change the board. At the office, I sat with the files that mattered. I ran my fingers over printed pages, breathed in the paper dust, listened to the faint whir of the copier like a metronome. I checked metadata, the invisible fingerprints inside every document, timestamps, IP addresses, file hashes, little things everyone assumes are boring until they become proof. "Nia," I said, leaning over her desk one afternoon, "pull the original server logs for the Cole estate. I need access times for the past 3 months." She blinked at me. "You sure? That's a deep dive." "I'm sure," I said, and watched her face change from curiosity to worry. "Do it now." She left to fetch them, and I breathed. The hunt had a rhythm: find, verify, hide. I could not let a single piece of evidence be linked back to me until I was ready to strike. If they smelled blood, they'd swarm. That night I went to see Margaret. She lived alone in a house that smelled like lemon oil and old books. When she opened the door, I saw the same fragile woman who'd first come to me afraid and small, except now her eyes were fierce. "Clara," she said, grasping my hands. They trembled, but her voice was steady. "You defended everyone else. Now it's time to defend yourself." I wanted to laugh. "They'll destroy me," she squeezed my fingers. "Then make sure they can't." Her faith in me was a torch. I left her house with more than files. I left with purpose. At home, I became an actress. Around Ethan, I played the remorseful, weary lawyer he'd painted me as. I said things I didn't mean. I flinched when he mentioned the courtroom. I let him believe I was broken. "You'll thank me when this is over," he told me one evening as he poured wine. His smile was tight, satisfied. "Thank you for what?" I asked, voice small. "For saving us from your mistake." I nodded. Let the lie sit between us. Inside, I was mapping every syllable, memorizing the cadence of his calm. When he was near, I listened for the quiet tells, a tightening in his jaw when he lied, a delayed swallow before a big claim. I started keeping my phone within reach at all times, recording our exchanges. Sometimes I pretended not to notice and let him speak into the air. Other times I drew him into conversation, casual, then pointed. "You ever worry about work getting to you?" I asked once, watching him from the sink. He laughed, a short, empty sound. "You worry too much. You don't ever worry?" "Not really," he shrugged. "I handle it." "Handle what exactly?" I pressed, voice light. "Those secure files?" He froze for a fraction. Then he smiled. "You trust me, right?" I did. I was a liar, and I used that against him. Every night after he fell asleep, I replayed the day and labeled the lies. I cataloged them like evidence tags. Lie 01, lie E02. I transcribed our conversations and saved the recordings in a folder with a name he'd never suspect. A folder buried inside a drive labeled Old Case Notes. It felt like burying treasure under a children's game. But it was safer than yelling in public. I needed help I couldn't afford to name publicly. I needed someone who could follow servers and trace IP hops without the drama. Someone outside the system who owed me a favor. So I called Tom Mercer. Tom had been a private investigator before he retired to a quieter life fixing boats. Years ago, I'd helped him get an honest reference after he'd been accused of stretching the rules to catch a scam artist. He'd never forgotten it. Neither had I. The line clicked and his voice, dry, rough, and steady, came through. "Clara, long time." "Tom," I said. My voice was low. "I need you." There was a pause. I filled it. "They set me up. I have emails. I have a folder in his car. But I need someone to dig clean traces. IP addresses, server logs, proof that these documents were planted." Tom whistled softly. "Sounds like a mess. You can do it." "I can," he said. Then quieter. "They picked the wrong lawyer to betray." The words were simple, but they landed like a weightless stone that made waves. I almost smiled. "Can you meet me tomorrow?" "I'll be there." Before I hung up, he added, "Bring everything you've got. And Clara, be careful. These people don't play fair." I tucked the phone away, feeling the strange mix of fear and energy that comes before a storm. I'd been wounded, yes, but not destroyed. Not yet. Over the next days, I acted small and waited. I let Ethan wander into smugness, confident he'd won. I watched him make careless choices, using unencrypted channels, leaving his phone near the sink. Each slip was a doorway. At the office, I met with Margaret between client appointments. "You okay?" she asked, eyes searching. "Better," I lied. "We're making progress." She nodded once as if she believed me, and maybe she did. Or maybe she was simply tired of lifting the weight of my battles off me and wanted to help. That night, I sat with Tom in a crowded diner booth, the overhead light making his hair look like steel. He passed me a legal pad and 2 black coffee cups. "So show me," he said. I slid the flash drive across the table. "Everything. Emails, screenshots, timestamps. Start with the chain of custody." He looked at the drive, then at me. "They picked the wrong lawyer to betray," he repeated. "Because you don't just fold, you fight." His certainty was a kindling. I felt the first spark of something dangerous and beautiful. Strategy. "Good," I said, wrapping my fingers around my cup until it creaked. "Then let's burn their plan down." They smelled the fight in me before I even spoke. I could feel it, the way people look at a dog that won't back down. Once you stop being predictable, they sharpen their teeth. It started small, then sped up like a train. My phone buzzed while I was drafting a motion. Unknown number. I glanced at the screen and answered before I could think. "Drop the cold case," a man's voice hissed, distorted. "Walk away, Hayes. This is not your mess." "Who is this?" I said, hand clamped around the phone so hard my knuckles whitened. "Tell Margaret to sign." Let it go. Static. Then nothing. I held the line, waiting for another whisper. Only the thudding of my heart replied. The calls multiplied. Different numbers, same message, no names, no mercy. At the firm, people started avoiding eye contact. Nia tried to smile, but there were worry lines etched deeper than before. "Anything new?" she asked, pushing a coffee toward me. "Just noise," I said, forcing a laugh I didn't feel. She lowered her voice. A file popped up online. "Someone uploaded a psychiatric report. Says you're unstable. Says you have a history of emotional collapse. It looks professional." She searches my face. "It's gone viral in our circles." My stomach dropped. "Who would do that?" I whispered. "Someone who wants you out." She squeezed my hand. "They're saying the firm should suspend you pending review." "No," I breathed. "They can't." By lunchtime, HR called me into a meeting. The conference room felt suddenly cold, sterile. I sat across from the managing partner, the same woman who'd once toasted my promotions. "Clara," she said gently, paper in hand. "We received information. For the firm's protection, we're placing you on administrative leave while we review these allegations." "My leave?" My voice sounded small in the room. "This is fabricated. I'll provide proof." "Tom's investigating." "I'm sorry," she interrupted. "We have to follow procedure." I left the office with my head buzzing. The fluorescent lights outside the elevator felt harsher than before. Co-workers' eyes slid past me, some sympathetic, some guarded like they were watching a contagious disease. That night, home tried to be normal. Ethan cooked dinner, salmon with lemon, my favorite. He plated the food carefully, set a glass of wine in front of me, sat opposite, and watched me as if I were fragile. "You okay?" he asked, voice soft. "Fine," I said, pushing peas around my plate. He leaned in. "Have you been taking your medication?" His tone was almost playful. The question poised like a petulant test. "You know the doctor mentioned stress management." "My what?" I choked on a laugh that turned ugly. "I'm not on medication. You don't remember? A quick prophylactic while everything settles." He smiled with the practiced warmth of a man making a joke. "No, Ethan." I set my fork down. "I haven't been to a doctor." He reached across, touched my hand. "You look tired. Maybe you should rest, for everyone's sake." Is that supposed to be comforting? I snapped, and the sound surprised me. He squeezed my fingers, and the smile morphed into concern. "I only want what's best for you, gaslight." The word felt like a blade. He was trying to make me doubt my own reality. Just enough for others to doubt it too. The same people who'd once congratulated me were now reading headlines and nodding, like they'd been shown a different version of events. The opposing counsel upped the pressure in court like a conductor raising the tempo. "Counselor Hayes," Mason whispered in the hallway, "we found new inconsistencies in the Cole account." "Looks like tampering." "What?" I said. "We have a chain of custody." "Oh," he smiled, too bright. "You'll have to address that before the judge." "We filed a motion." He tapped a manila folder. "Evidence tampering. If the court decides it's true, it would be grounds for immediate sanctions." Those words felt like a gut punch. "You can't." "We can," he shrugged. "We will." In the judge's chambers, the magistrate's eyes were tired. Her voice was low and sharp. "Counselor Hayes, I don't want theatrics in my courtroom. One procedural misstep, and I have no choice but to remove you from the case." "I understand," I said, swallowing. She regarded me a moment longer. "You're a good lawyer. Don't let personal matters drag your professionalism down." Good lawyer. I repeated the phrase in my head like a prayer, as if I could conjure it back with belief. After court, a stream of anonymous messages arrived, doctored images of me with captions about instability, a falsified timeline showing erratic behavior. The firm's suspension became the gossip machine's fuel. I watched as the life I'd built curdled into rumor. Still, Margaret showed up at my apartment that night with a thermos and 2 paper cups, like the small, fierce woman she was. "You don't have to be alone," she said, handing me a cup. Her knuckles were knobby. Her voice was steady as an old oak. "Tell me what they're doing." I poured the coffee and told her everything, the calls, the files, the judge's warning. She listened without blinking. "They're bullies," she said finally. "But you know the law. You know what's right." "I don't know anymore." My hands trembled as I spoke. She put both hands over mine. "When I first met you, you said something I never forgot. You said, truth deserves a champion even when it's unpopular. Remember that? Now it's your turn to be your own champion." Her faith felt like glue sealing cracks. I took a breath and steadied myself. Late that night, Tom called. "You were right," he said immediately. "No preamble. Ethan's been funneling money through accounts that can be traced back to your client's estate." "How sure are you?" My voice was thin with hope and fear, enough to make you breathe. He paused. "Not public yet, but I pulled bank trails, shell companies, micro-transfers, routing through different institutions. It's deliberate. Can you prove it in court?" I asked. "Proof's messy," he said. "But yeah, if we thread it right, it's a smoking gun, the kind that makes people sit up." I held the phone so tightly it squeaked against my ear. "Bring everything to me tomorrow. I will. And Clara, be careful." There was a crack in his voice, an old man's worry that used to be mine to soothe. That night, alone in the dark, I sat at my kitchen table. The house felt like a stage set, everything placed, everything pretending. The sound of the refrigerator hummed like a countdown. I took the flash drive from my blazer pocket. The one with the emails between Ethan and Mason, the screenshots, the timestamps Tom would need. It felt small and impossibly heavy. My thumb traced its smooth edge. If I plugged it into the right machine, the evidence could destroy them. But if I revealed it too soon, they'd circle and flatten whatever I had left. If I waited too long, they'd bury me first. I thought about all the times I'd sworn to protect others, clients, friends, the elderly widow who trusted me with the last days of her life. The oath to defend had always felt simple. Find truth, present it, fight. Now the rules had changed. Truth was a weapon I had to sharpen in secret. My hand started to shake. Not from fear, from the pressure of decision. I swallowed hard, feeling the metallic taste of adrenaline. Outside, the city slept. Inside, the lights from across the street blinked like watchful eyes. I whispered, "You want to break me? Try again." Then I closed my fingers around the flash drive and felt, for the first time since the court transcript had been read out loud, something steady and cold settle in my chest. Not surrender. Resolve. Tomorrow I would march back into the arena. They'd ramped up the noise, pushed every boundary. But I had a plan now. Evidence that could not be waved away by whispers. I stood and walked to the window. Rain started, soft at first, then harder, tapping a cadence I recognized, a drumbeat for the fight ahead. I held the flash drive up between my thumb and forefinger, like a small, dangerous promise. "They picked the wrong person to break," I said to the empty room. My voice was small but steady, and then I turned out the light. The night before I planned to expose everything, the air felt too still, that strange electric quiet right before a storm. I barely slept. My mind kept rehearsing what would happen when I handed over the evidence, when I finally turned the tables on Ethan and Mason. By dawn, I'd packed everything, the flash drive, my printed notes, Tom's verified financial trail. It was all inside a small black pouch I hid in the drawer beside my bed. I remember touching it before leaving for work that morning, the way you might touch a cross or a lucky charm. I told myself, tomorrow, this nightmare ends, but I was wrong. It happened that evening. When I got home, the front door was cracked open, just slightly, a soft gap, like a mouth that had started to whisper and then froze mid-sentence. I froze, pulse thundering in my throat. "Ethan?" I called out. My voice wobbled. "Are you home?" Silence. The living room lights were on, but the house felt wrong. A cushion on the floor, a lamp knocked over, the faint smell of cologne that wasn't ours. I reached for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "Yes, this is Clara Hayes," I said, trying to sound calm. My house! I think someone broke in. The dispatcher asked if anyone was still inside. I told her I didn't know. When the officers arrived, I waited outside, arms wrapped around myself as the night wind bit at my skin. They went in with flashlights, clearing each room one by one. 15 minutes later, one of them came back, young, polite, trying to sound reassuring. "Ma'am, looks like a break-in. Probably someone looking for cash or electronics. We'll dust for prints." I walked back in, and my knees nearly gave out. The bedroom drawer was open. The pouch, gone. Not the TV, not the jewelry, not even the cash envelope in the kitchen drawer. Just that one pouch. My heart crashed into my ribs. "It's missing," I said to the officer. "There was something here. Important documents. Legal evidence." He frowned, jotting notes. "Could be a coincidence, ma'am. Thieves don't always act logically." "No," I snapped. This wasn't random. They knew what they were looking for. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later, all faux panic and breathless concern. He ran to me, hands on my shoulders. "Clara, are you okay?" "What happened?" I stared at him, searching his face for something. Guilt, fear, anything. But he looked calm, too calm. "They took the flash drive," I whispered. His eyes flickered for half a second. "There, gone." Then he turned to the police. "She's been under a lot of stress lately," he said. "This must be terrifying for her. Thank you for coming." The officers nodded, sympathetic. When they finished taking notes and left, the air between us thickened. Ethan walked slowly toward me. His shoes crunched faintly on broken glass from the lamp. "Some things," he said softly, "are better left buried." My body went cold. "What did you just say?" He smiled, that same empty smile he'd worn in court. "I said, we'll get through this, together." Then he kissed my forehead like a stranger signing off a business deal and walked upstairs. I stood there shaking. Every piece of strength I'd been clinging to cracked open like thin glass. He had won, at least for now. My proof was gone. Everything I'd built my case on, every bite, every timestamp, gone. That night, I sat in my office, surrounded by the chaos of files and half-written motions, my mind blank. My eyes burned from crying, but I couldn't stop. I felt gutted, hollowed out. I thought about walking away, just letting it all collapse. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was fighting a war I couldn't win. I pressed my palms to my eyes and whispered, "I can't do this anymore." The sound of my own voice scared me. Small, breaking. I reached for my phone to call Tom, but there was no answer. Then I noticed something. A missed call from him, time-stamped just hours before the break-in. There was also a voicemail. I played it. His voice was gravelly, hurried. "Clara, if you're hearing this, I might be late. Check the safe at your office. Don't trust anyone. They're moving faster than I expected." My head shot up. The safe. I stumbled to my car and drove like a ghost through the empty streets. When I reached the office, the building was dark, only the hallway exit sign casting red light across the floor. My keycard still worked. I pushed open my door and went straight to the corner where the small safe was hidden behind a shelf. My hands were shaking as I entered the code. Click. Inside were stacks of client files, and one silver flash drive taped to the inner wall with a note. My breath caught. The note read, "Backups. Just in case." I sank to my knees, clutching the drive like it was life itself. For a moment, everything was quiet again. Not the suffocating silence of loss, but the fragile quiet of survival. He hadn't trusted the world either. He'd saved a copy. I laughed through my tears. The sound messy and wild. "They destroyed my peace," I whispered. "But not my proof." I closed the safe, tucked the drive into my pocket, and stood up, outside. The storm had finally broken, rain hitting the windows in rhythmic bursts, and for the first time in days, I smiled. They thought they'd buried me, but they didn't know I was already digging my way out. I rebuilt everything from the ground up, like a surgeon stitching muscle to bone. Careful, methodical, refusing to let anything rot. Tom and I worked in a tiny war room at my office that smelled of stale coffee and toner. He'd spread printouts across my conference table, pins and string like some old detective movie, while I sifted through emails and bank traces until my eyes stung. Start with timeline, Tom said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. If we can show sequence and motive, we can make it look deliberate. Right. I tapped my pen against the table until the rhythm steadied my hands. We need the emails, the flight logs, metadata, timestamps on the files he accessed, and any payments into shell accounts, Tom grunted. I pulled wire transfers. I followed the breadcrumb accounts. See this? He pointed to a column of small transfers, tiny round numbers that meant nothing alone, but together formed a ladder. Micro-transfers used to hide laundering. They moved money through 5 countries over 3 months. My throat tightened. And Mason's firm? 2 payments from that last shell company hit a consulting account registered to an LLC with ties to their firm. He tapped the file. And here, a time-stamped screenshot of your folder in his car, dated the morning he testified. I felt something hot and fierce in my chest. So he had the files before he took the stand. And he coordinated with Mason, Tom said quietly. Emails show draft testimony. Look. He slid a printout across to me. Subject lines, times, phrases like testimony draft and timing for leaks. I read the lines until they blurred. They planned the wig removal, the leak timing, the psychiatric smear. My voice fell away. Tom nodded. They built a narrative. We'll dismantle it. We spent the next 2 days building the story piece by piece. Each email became a paragraph. Each transfer became a chapter. We cross-referenced flight manifests with timestamps from the files and discovered a pattern. Every business trip Ethan took coincided with a new leak or a piece of evidence turning up where it shouldn't. The conspiracy had choreography. We drew it on paper until the fingers of the map were cramped. When I explained it to Margaret, she listened with that steady gaze that had seen decades of life. After I finished, she squeezed my hand. We'll show them what truth looks like, she said, voice small but fierce. I came to you because you fought when no one else would. Now fight for yourself. Her conviction was a kindling beneath the cold ash. I promised her I would. But outside the office, the world still expected the image I'd been playing. The broken lawyer, suspended, on the verge of collapse. So I kept playing that role. Around Ethan, I limped through apology and weariness. Let him think the break-in and suspension had wrenched me into surrender. I let my face fall into expressions he'd rehearsed for me. You look tired, he'd say, and I would let him touch my arm like a man checking a patient's pulse. I gave him the small concessions that made him cocky, a slumped shoulder here, a sigh there, while I collected every scrap of leverage I could. At the firm, I asked for limited access to the evidence room under the pretense of organizing personal notes for the judge. They watched me with wary eyes, but I moved like a ghost among shelves, memorizing where folders were kept, leaving no fingerprint of my desperation. Each time I left a room, I closed the door like a secret. Tom and I rehearsed courtroom choreography like 2 dancers. You open with the timeline, he said. Start human. Make the jury feel the slow burn, files planted, transfers timed, testimony scripted. Then drop the financial trail, and then the emails? I asked. Save one email for the end, the one that ties the settlement talk to their motive. He tapped a highlighted line. Once she's disbarred, the settlement is ours. That's the smoking gun. You close with it. I practiced the cadence until it became muscle memory. They thought they could bury me, I rehearsed aloud in the empty office late at night, voice echoing against glass. They thought silence would swallow truth. I stopped and swallowed. The words still felt brittle. At home, I kept my head down. Ethan watched me with that dangerous, half-satisfied look. You're thinking about tomorrow, he said one evening as he set a plate down in front of me. Maybe you should rest. Rest, I echoed. How can I rest when everything's on the line? He shrugged. Some people perform better under pressure. His eyes lingered on mine in a way that made my skin crawl. I smiled, a small mechanical smile. Then we'll see who performs better. The night before the reveal, Margaret insisted on joining me at the office. We sat with takeout and a stack of exhibits between us. Her frail hands turned pages gently, as if each one were prayer. You look terrible, she said, pointing to the dark circles under my eyes. But there's steel in you. You always did see things clearly. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them wide. Tomorrow I expose it all. The emails, the transfers, the testimony drafts. I tie it to them, to Mason's firm and to Ethan. She nodded. Don't hold back. I rehearsed my closing statement into the night, voice cracking and smoothing with each pass. I imagined the jury leaning forward. I imagined Mason's face when the record laid bare his greed. I imagined Ethan's expression when the truth knocked the wind out of him. Tom checked my notes one last time. You end with truth, he said simply. Let the judge and the jury see the person behind the wig and the man behind the emails. I stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, my reflection pale in the conference room window. Hands trembling, I whispered the line that had become my last. Best weapon. Justice doesn't hide behind wigs. It tears them off. The morning of the final hearing felt unnaturally calm. Too calm. Like the silence before a thunderstorm. My hands were steady as I buttoned my blazer. No trembling. No panic, just focus. Every fiber of me knew this was it. The moment everything would either collapse or finally make sense. When I stepped out of the car, the courthouse loomed ahead like a cold monument. Its glass doors reflected the dawn, sharp, clear, merciless. My heels clicked against the marble, echoing through the hallway as I walked toward the courtroom. Every step reminded me of the countless nights spent preparing for this one day. He was already there. Ethan, sitting beside Mason, the opposing counsel. Both of them whispering, smirking like predators who'd already devoured their prey. Mason leaned closer to Ethan, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear. She looks calm. Maybe she finally accepted it's over. Ethan chuckled softly. She always plays strong before she breaks. I met his eyes, didn't blink. Just smiled, the smallest, coldest smile I could manage. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind his confidence. Something uncertain. The courtroom filled with murmurs as the judge entered. Everyone rose. Then silence. The heavy kind that presses against your chest. The proceedings began. Mason was first, all theatrics and polish. His voice dripped with false righteousness. Your Honor, my client acted in good faith. He discovered that his wife, my learned friend, misused client funds and attempted to cover her tracks. He did what any ethical person would do. He reported it. My jaw clenched, but I said nothing. He paced slowly, turning toward the jury. Imagine his pain, Mason continued, gesturing toward Ethan. A man torn between love and law. But he chose truth over loyalty. Ethan lowered his head, just enough to look tragic. A master actor. I could feel the tension rising in my chest, but I held it in. I had one goal, to wait, to let them hang themselves with their own lies. When Mason finished, he gave a small, triumphant nod toward Ethan. Then he turned to me. Your Honor, the defense rests. The judge looked my way. Counselor? I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. The sound was sharp enough to slice the silence. I walked to the center of the courtroom, calm, deliberate. Every eye followed me. I didn't speak right away. I just looked at Ethan. Let the pause stretch until even Mason shifted uncomfortably. Then softly I said, For months, I stayed quiet. I let you paint me as a villain, but today, silence ends. I opened the folder in front of me and pulled out a small flash drive. My voice was steady. Your Honor, permission to present new evidence. Mason shot up. Objection. This is highly irregular. These so-called new files are, the judge raised a hand, overruled. Let her proceed. I nodded and walked to the screen. My heart hammered, but my face stayed composed. The tech clerk plugged the drive in. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly. The first file loaded. A recording. The room filled with Ethan's voice, cold and unmistakable. Once she's out of the picture, we get the money. Mason's firm gets the settlement. I get the rest moved through her accounts. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Ethan shot to his feet. That's edited. That's fake. I didn't even look at him. Let's continue. The next slide appeared. Email threads, time-stamped, between Mason and Ethan. Messages that laid out every step of their plan. The fabricated evidence. The leak of the psychiatric report. Even the planted motion claiming I tampered with files. Mason's face drained of color. Ethan leaned toward him, whispering furiously. "You said you deleted those." I turned to the judge. "These emails were verified by an independent investigator. Metadata confirms their authenticity." The judge's brows furrowed. "And this investigator is present?" A voice came from the back. "Right here, Your Honor." Tom stepped forward, calm, holding a thick binder. He placed it on the table before the judge. "These are certified copies of the digital forensics, along with surveillance stills." He flipped the binder open to a photo that made my breath catch, even though I'd seen it before. Ethan. Inside my office at night, the glow of my computer monitor reflecting off his face. The judge leaned forward. "Is this timestamp accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor. Pulled directly from building security." Ethan's composure shattered. "That's not me. I was home." Tom held up another image. Ethan's car entering the parking garage minutes before. The judge's voice hardened. "I suggest you refrain from lying under oath any further, Mr. Carter." Mason tried to intervene. "Your Honor, these images could be misinterpreted. My client was retrieving—" "Enough!" the judge snapped. "The evidence speaks clearly." I turned to Ethan then. For the first time since the nightmare began, I let all the emotion rise, not as weakness, but as fire. "You swore to love me in truth," I said, voice trembling but fierce. "And you couldn't even tell it under oath." He stared at me, mouth open, eyes wide, every mask stripped away. The judge picked up the gavel. The sound when it struck was final, echoing like thunder through the chamber. "Guilty," he said firmly. "Fraud, perjury, evidence tampering." Gasps filled the room again, then a hum of voices, the release of weeks of tension breaking at once. Ethan slumped in his chair, pale and defeated. Mason rubbed his forehead, muttering something about appeal, but even he knew it was over. The bailiff stepped forward to escort Ethan out. For a moment he turned back toward me, not with anger, but with something like disbelief. Like he'd never imagined the woman he tried to destroy could stand tall again. As they led him away, the courtroom buzzed with whispers, half shock, half awe. Margaret, sitting in the back, met my eyes. She didn't smile. She just nodded, slow, proud, understanding. Tom came up beside me. "You did it," I exhaled, finally letting my shoulders drop. "No," I said quietly. "We did it." As the courtroom emptied, I stayed for a moment, alone in the echoing space. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass of the evidence screen. Tired, worn, but still standing. And for the first time in months, I let myself smile, not in triumph, but in peace. They tried to bury me, but they forgot. I was the seed. The day the verdict went public, the world seemed to exhale with me. The headlines hit before I even left the courthouse. "Phoenix lawyer clears her name, exposes husband's scheme." It sounded unreal, like they were talking about someone else, not the woman who, just weeks ago, sat in her office staring at shredded evidence, shaking hands, and sleepless nights. The reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones flashing, voices overlapping. "Rachel, how does it feel to finally have justice? Did you ever suspect your husband before this? Will you return to practice after everything you've been through?" Their questions felt distant, muffled like they were coming from underwater. I smiled faintly, choosing silence. Sometimes silence speaks louder than 1,000 statements. I turned and walked down those courthouse stairs, sunlight glinting off the marble. For the first time in months, it didn't feel harsh or judgmental. It felt warm, healing. At home, the silence was different too. It wasn't heavy anymore. It didn't press against the walls or echo my loneliness. It was peaceful. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes. The faint smell of lavender from the old candles lingered in the air. I picked up a frame. Our wedding photo. We looked so young, so sure of ourselves. I traced the edge of the glass with my thumb, then placed it gently into a box marked "Past." Beside it lay my wedding ring, still shining, untouched by time, though the meaning behind it had turned to dust. I dropped it into the same box. The small clink it made sounded final. My eyes wandered to the shelf, Letters, cards, anniversary notes, the things that once made me smile. I packed them all away, one by one. When the last box was sealed, I sat on the couch, staring at it. "He took everything that mattered," I whispered softly, my voice barely audible. Then, after a breath, "Accept my truth." The next morning, I walked back into the firm. The air felt different there, too. The same people who once avoided eye contact now paused mid-conversation when they saw me. Whispers trailed behind me, some guilty, some admiring. "Is that her?" "She really proved it. I heard she caught them herself." I didn't respond. Just walked straight through the hall toward my office, that they'd locked me out of for weeks. When I opened the door, the faint scent of old paper and coffee hit me. My chair was still there, my books, my notes, everything waiting, as if time had been holding its breath. Lisa, my junior associate, appeared at the doorway, eyes wide and glossy. "I'm so sorry, Rachel," she whispered. "We should have believed you," I smiled gently. "You did what you thought was safe. We all make choices we regret." She nodded, blinking back tears. "The partners, they're all in the conference room. They want to see you." I sighed, not from fear this time, but from closure. When I entered, the room fell silent. The senior partners stood awkwardly, like school children about to be scolded. Mr. Reeves, the managing partner, spoke first. "Rachel, we owe you an apology. A public one." I raised a hand. "No need. The truth already did that for me." He exhaled, relieved. "Still, welcome back. The firm isn't the same without you." A quiet round of applause followed. Some polite, others genuine. For a moment, I just stood there, absorbing it. The same walls that once felt suffocating now echoed differently, not with suspicion, but with respect. Later that week, I returned to the courthouse. This time, not as the accused, not as the betrayed wife, but as what I was born to be, a lawyer, my client. The elderly widow waited near the courtroom doors. Her cane trembled slightly in her hand, but her eyes, those sharp, clear eyes, were full of pride. "You kept your promise," she said softly. I smiled. "So did you. You stood by me when no one else did." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Now go remind them what justice really looks like." Inside the courtroom, the judge entered. Everyone rose, the scent of polished wood, the rustle of papers, the low hum of anticipation. It all felt familiar, but new. I placed my notes on the table, straightened my blazer, and looked around. No fear. No shame, just purpose. When I spoke, my voice carried clearly through the chamber, confident, calm, whole. As I delivered my argument, I felt something powerful, not pride, not vengeance, but peace. I had survived every lie, every betrayal, every sleepless night, and somehow I was still here, still standing, still me. After the hearing, I stepped outside. The sky was soft pink, the kind of color that only comes after storms. Tom waited by the steps, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me with a smile. "Thought you might need this," he said. I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had in what felt like years. "You never miss a detail, do you?" He shrugged. Occupational habit. We stood there quietly for a moment, watching people rush past, lawyers, clients, strangers who had no idea what this place meant to me now. Finally, I said, "I used to think justice was something you fight for in court." Tom looked at me curiously. "And now? Now I know it's something you fight for inside yourself first." When I got home that evening, the sun had dipped low. I opened the window, letting the cool air in. The wind carried faint sounds, laughter from a nearby park, the city breathing again. I glanced at the sealed boxes stacked neatly in the corner. My past contained, my future unwritten, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of either. I sat at my desk, opened my journal, and wrote one line across the page. They tried to break me, but I built myself from the cracks. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you forgive? Or would you start over from nothing like I did? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know your thoughts. And if my story touched you, please like this video, share it, and subscribe for more stories like mine. Until next time, take care of your truth. It's the only thing they can't steal. Goodbye, and thank you for listening.